This podcast contains discussions of violence and other subject matter that may be triggering or disturbing to some audiences. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Okay, welcome back to the Two Talking Friends podcast. I am Kate, this is Shaba. I have a very special guest on the podcast this evening. It is my great pleasure to introduce Anthony Arillotta. Anthony, welcome.
Oh.
I can't even believe that you're here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
For those of you who know, we are based out of Connecticut. We have a huge Italian American culture population there, very close to Springfield, where Anthony's from. We're going to talk about everything about his life. For those of you who don't know, he was the captain of the Genovese family of the West Springfield, Connecticut faction. And that's a lot to talk about in the Mafia world, something that for us is well known. When you talk about Italian Americans, you talk about Boston, New York, everything in between. The Mafia to us it's just something, it's part of the culture. And we're going to talk about that today. So
we've heard your questions. We have them received. It is going to be an open interview. So Anthony, thank you very much for the honesty.
My pleasure.
Anything that you guys sent over, we will make sure to cover that for you.
So we're going to start right in. We're going to start right in with you.
Mm-hmm.
You as a child, talk to us a little bit about your dad, the store, Springfield at that time. What was it like to be in Springfield growing up?
I love Springfield. I still, love Springfield. It has a bad reputation, one of the worst cities in America, but I love Springfield. I loved the growing up there. It was great as a kid. I was a good kid. I was like a wise guy, little wise guy, always getting in trouble, playing, jokes and always teasing. And, all the older guys, I would go to my father's store, I would always tease them, do things like that, hanging around. And just, good. I was not a good kid growing up. My father was a good man. I worked at his store at a young age. He had a very successful produce, vegetables, fruits, biggest wine grape distributor.
Yeah.
And all of Mass Connecticut area, 40 trailer loads a year, backbreaking work, very hard.
I heard the prices. You were sharing the prices of the produce, the way he had it back in the time. He was like the modern day Costco.
Exactly. He would you could go to the grocery store and spend $100 at my father's store for what you could have to pay $400 at a grocery store. Bananas were 5 pounds for $1 at my father's store. They were, $1.29 a pound at the grocery store.
Yeah.
Lettuce was 3 for $1, 3 heads. You go to the grocery store, it's $1.39 for one. So people would come in by 50. It was all immigrants. A lot of, Springfield was loaded with Italian immigrants. High population of Italian immigrants.
Calabrese, where are they coming from? Primarily?
A lot of Napolitans, Calabrese, Sicilians.
Yeah.
Mostly those three. But there was a lot of Napolitans too, because there's a small town in Italy.
Right.
And there's 2 small towns that they come from. So, like when people come from Italy and they come to another country and they got family there, where'd you go? Well, they settled in Springfield, Mass. Now all their relatives and everything, come. And so when other later on, when New York gangsters used to come up and see what we had in the Western Mass area, all these Italian, they couldn't believe how heavily populated Italian is. They're coming from New York cities and we're loaded with all these Italian immigrants. Right. So they, my father catered to the poor people, the people that were, back then food stamps were actually money. In the 70s, they were actually $1, $5, $10, and $20 bills. And so my father had a very successful business. I used to help him count the money. I used to work there at a young age, 6, 7 years old. We'd make our own wine and I'd help him count the money. On a Saturday, he did $25,000. You're going back to the 70s now. He did $25,000 on a Saturday.
That's a shitload of money.
Yeah. It's all cash. There's no credit cards back then. There's none of this. This is all cash. So you got a big bag of money and you got to straighten it out. 1s, 5s, 10s, 20s, 50s, and then put them in order and put them in $2,000 stacks and put a band on it, get it ready for the bank the next day. So that's what I helped them do. I was around money at a young age. It was a great, great atmosphere being at the store. It was loaded with all our family, both sides. My mother's side, her side is from Naples. My father's side is from Calabria. And so both sides of my family worked there. My grandparents on my mother's side, my grandparents on my father's side, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, everybody.
Generations were involved. The
Yeah.
good old days. You don't see that anymore.
Yeah. And it was a fun store. Like the store would be packed with fruits and vegetables and pallets of, potatoes and onions right on the floor. And we'd have 6 cashiers, my mother, my sister, my aunt, my grandmother, my aunt. And then there would be a line still 20 deep waiting with 6 cashiers. We go back to when you put the grapes on the scale and then it's 99 cents a pound. And then it comes to, $1.40. We used to write it down, $1.40. Those were the receipts in pen and and then have to add it all up. Yeah, those were actually before the little things came out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was just a great atmosphere. We have a kitchen in the back, and we have a stove, and we would have the homemade wine there, and homemade super salads and cup of bowls, and we would cook sausages and meatballs, and it would be like a party there all day long. Guys would come in the morning, start drinking the homemade wine.
Yeah,
we had an Italian guy walking around with a guitar singing Italian music.
When people actually took pride. We'll talk about it later, but you and I discussed Franklin Ave. In an ideal world, it would have been great for us to meet on Franklin Ave at one of the old places.
Yeah.
There's nothing left. It's decimated.
Right. I mean, it's, there's certain spots you go to, even in Springfield, there's certain areas, they got a coffee shop still. But everything's spread out.
Yeah.
You know why? Because it's not like the north end of Boston. It's tenements above.
Yeah.
And to live there, it's like 5,000, 6,000. It's expensive.
Yeah.
So that you don't have any lower income, people moving in. You have to have money to live there.
Right.
And so it keeps the neighborhood and all the businesses flourishing, and that's why they were able to survive the North End in places like Boston. Springfield is more, and Hartford is more of, you got housing and houses. If you're making money, you're not going to want to live, you want to go to another suburb or with a bigger land and, less noise and, different. So everyone moves away like that, which they do the same thing in New York and Boston. But the only problem is the areas are city type things with buildings, and those to live there is expensive.
Right, 100%. Yeah, I'm serious. Yeah. So it just seems like those were the good days. Your dad seemed like an honest man, never got into this. Gambling, but never, not a bookie or nothing like that.
Exactly. Great guy. Everyone, not because he's my father, everyone will tell you, everybody really liked my father. I mean, he was just a down-to-earth, blue-collar worker.
Yeah. That's what carried his community.
Yeah.
For the poor people.
Yeah.
And, everyone that, just liked him growing up, and he had a very successful business. I admired him. The only thing he liked to do was bet the games, the sporting events. And that was his and play golf. Those were his passion, was the golf. And later on, he used to be a good handicapper picking the games. He was good at it. People used to come to the store and, ask him for his picks because he was actually, good.
Yeah.
And so, he was a hardworking guy. Always told me he didn't want me around, the Italian organized crime criminals. Growing up, my grandparents would be like, oh, the Mafia, they're not good people. They're bad people. But when they would see them, they would treat them with respect. When the Mafia came into the store, the organized crime criminals came into our store, they got treated with the red carpet treat. They were treated like kings.
Well, your dad, do you think your dad feared them?
It's not about fear. If you're not part of the Mafia, then you don't have to fear them. But you'll respect them, and you would never. So it was respect, because of who they are. And that part of, what the Mafia was back then, I don't know, nobody could understand what it was like throughout history, all the way up until, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, how powerful of an organization was. When you see a Mafia boss, that was literally like seeing the president of the United States or a CEO of a major corporation that you got today. It was like, that's how powerful these bosses were and what they controlled. And, the Mafia controlled throughout, legitimate businesses, all the street rackets, just about everything that there was, the Mafia had control or was involved in at some point, and all that. So it wasn't that they were fearful. They were, they respected the mafia and maybe fearful of crossing them. Nobody would want to cross them, things like that. But if you're not in that life with them, you don't have to be fearful. They're not coming up to you to, just to, be mean guys to you unless you got some involvement with them. If you're betting with them and you don't pay, you got a reason to fear them now.
Right.
Things like that.
So this isn't something where the mafia is coming up to your dad and saying, "Hey, you want protection?
No.
We'll cover." Not at all. No.
In our area, that did happen in the mafia.
Yeah.
People, and it happened later on in our area when Al Bruno took over as boss.
We'll talk about that. Yeah.
Extortion, you call that protection.
Yeah.
And it's extortion is what it is. You go to back in throughout history, they would go and have guys go into a restaurant, cause some trouble, get into a fight, break the place up. Then the mobster would come in and said, "Hey, I could give you protection, so none of that stuff happens here. You'll know that you're on record with us." And these guys, and that's when it was loaded with, Italians living in neighborhoods.
Right.
So now that would be a form of how they would do it. Give us something every week.
We'll take care.
You got a problem with these kids, we'll keep them out of there. We'll keep them in line and everything like that. It didn't exist in Western Mass and things like that. You might the way they did it more or less they would be partnered up in some sort of business with like say the trash.
Yeah.
We go to them and say, "Can we put our dumpsters here?"
Yeah.
Can we service your foods? Use this food.
That was one of the questions that we had.
Yeah. Because everybody wants to know, what is the correlation between trash and the mafia?
Well, the trash was like, like you got the cartels running the drugs today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It was just as lucrative as the drug business. That's how much money the trash business brought in. And the mafia controlled it all. Although I'm going back, 40s, 50s,
Sure.
they could, and it was a cartel. It was a huge, huge money source for the mafia. And there's so many avenues with it. There's the actual trash pickup, the dumpsters. You got the big thing when they're doing construction. The mafia controls the construction industry and the concrete industry. And you need to, when they're building these buildings, you need those big dumpsters. So the trash removal is huge.
Exactly.
And then you're not talking about where you're dumping the trash now. You got landfills involved. They get involved in the landfills. They get involved in the transfer stations. There's so many avenues that, that branch off in the trash business. That's why they went after them so strong. The FBI and organized crime task went after them to dismantle that. And then they would kick the mafia out, put the not government controlled, but, legitimate, let's say, companies in there. And they did the same thing that the mafia did. They lowered the prices at first. And then a few years later, it's back up to where the mafia had even more than it was because they took it over.
Yeah.
They had the monopoly. So, the trash business was very lucrative for the gangsters, and so that was a way that we could get into the businesses, exterminating business. Every business needs this place. Everybody needs an exterminator.
Right.
Now you get exterminator, the fish industry, the food industry. There was anything that can service, anything that services. That's how you could treat the businesses legally. And now they respect you because you're not shaking them down. You're not asking them for money for nothing. You're giving them a service.
Right.
And they have to buy this stuff anyway. So why not give it to the local mafia people?
Now, another question for you, and it may be in line with exactly what you're talking about. Another question that we had received was, what is the correlation between the mafia and pig farming?
And what?
Pig farming, like the farming industry? Pigs?
Oh, I don't know about pigs. I know that.
I told you guys we would ask the questions you had.
Yeah.
I am merely a messenger.
I mean, we had a pig.
Him being 16 years old.
It's okay, but we're there now, so we have. I told our listeners we would ask the questions. So we're asking.
Growing up, we did have a farm, and I did have a
You're
pig
welcome,
on it.
guys. You're welcome.
We did have a pig on it. We called him Minnie the pig, and this pig got to be like 600 pounds. And it would break out of not the cage. We had him where the garden was, huge garden at my grandfather's house. and somehow it would get out and it would chase the neighborhood kids. And they used to have to call the police to come and everything. And then finally had to put it down, whatever. It got to be like 600 pounds.
The problem.
Thank you for that question. See, they had to put down the damn peg.
Yeah. That's just about as bad as a question you asked Air Force Amy.
I am merely a messenger. Air Force Amy was my question.
Yeah.
I made it.
She goes from Howard Stern to the two talking fools. But anyways, okay. So you're 16, you're 15, you're 16, and now you're starting to cause some trouble.
Mhm. Yeah.
So what is it? Why your dad's a good, hardworking man. You're at the store all the time. I'm assuming mom's great.
Mhm. Yeah, it's just growing up, being a wise guy, getting in trouble, fooling around, busting balls, teasing a lot. Sometimes it gets carried away. You get into some fights, but all like innocent type stuff. But I was always getting into fights for whatever reason. I don't know. It wasn't like, just what little kids growing up, getting into fights. I've been doing it since kindergarten, first grade. And there's no reason for it. I grew up with in a great household, good family, had everything I wanted growing up.
Yeah.
Food, place to stay, food,
Sure.
So it was just getting in trouble. And then I think I had this thing like once you started getting like be a little gang of us. And our gang is the toughest gang. We're tougher than that gang. Let's go fight them. And you're with that, like little things like that. So, like we hung around down the south end of Springfield.
Yeah.
And there was a gang of us. And so we would travel around other parts of the city and fight the other neighborhood gangs, kids that would hang around in their areas. And that's how I started getting in trouble a lot. I got arrested at 15 for an assault and battery, dangerous weapon. I was a juvenile. And it started then. It just carried up to, more and more. And they got more and more violent, with weapons and, it started getting into guns and knives and more arrests. And eventually it led into me getting probation. And then I ended up getting a more serious charge with a gun incident, a shooting case. And that's what got me a 5-year sentence in 1990. I got 5-year sentence in state prison.
So how old were you at that time?
I was 20 years old. I was born in 68. And so I was 21. It was 1990. 1990, I was going to be 22 in 1990. So I was 21.
So you're 21, 5 years. Are you like, fuck it, I don't care? Like, are you that much of a wise guy? Or you're like, holy shit, like,
I'm serving 5
five
years.
freaking years, 2.5 maybe, that they cut the sentence down. I don't know.
So I took everything like, I wasn't nervous at all. I was actually like excited about going into a state prison because it gives you like now, I got a state prison sentence under me and
You got cred.
but
Yeah.
and in looking back, it was like the best thing that happened to me because, I'm living at home. I got food when my mother cooks. I eat whenever I want. I don't got no bills. I have no responsibility. I can do whatever I want. My family's got money. And so I wasn't on my own. And I don't think that's good for kids to have, to grow up like that. You need to start hustling at a young age. The poor people, and we weren't rich, but we were middle class. And the poor people, the kids are like getting newspaper routes going. They're shining shoes. They're busting tables at restaurants. They're hustling at a young age. After school, they're 10 years old coming home to work somewhere,
Right. 100%.
And so I didn't have to do that. So when I went to prison, it was a 5-year sentence and I had to do a year mandatory because it was a gun case. So with the chance of parole, I could get out in a year. And that's what happened. I got out, but I violated twice. So I ended up doing like 2 years on that 5-year sentence. But I learned so much being in prison. My first cellie was a guy doing life in prison without parole. And I got around with guys that were doing natural life, older men and older wise guys and gangsters. And they taught me, Mass has a lot of Irish organized crime criminals and Italian organized crime. So, when I went to prison, it was, it wasn't like you see today, where it's like more predominantly Spanish and black and, and the white is like, there's really no organized crime left in, the state prison system. But back then it was like 50-50. It's like, it was like a huge population with us. We had the Italian club, the Irish club, and there was no racism there. Like everybody, could talk. There wasn't none of that racial divide. Like when I went in there, I was on the Spanish.
Each other. It was,
Yeah, my first team I got on was the Spanish team. I played with the Spanish. I didn't play with the Italians or the Irish. It was like, it wasn't like that. That's it. Everything was cool, and I learned so much about making money and what rackets to get in when I get out, and what rackets don't bring in the big, huge prison sentences, like the cocaine and the crack cocaine and heroin, huge prison sentences.
Right.
Get involved more with the sports gambling, loan sharking.
But isn't that why you stuck with marijuana? Because it was just if you were to get caught, lesser sentence, right?
It was like drilled in my head. Marijuana would bring you a under 50-pound sentence. It would bring you a misdemeanor charge. So a misdemeanor charge, you get caught. I got caught with 40 pounds, and they would indict me for anything up to superior court, right? But I was in district court because it was a misdemeanor. And, you don't get prison time for things like that.
Right.
You get you're pretty much you get a good attorney. I had the best attorney that there was.
Yeah.
And so you're going to either beat the case or you're going to get a probation type sentence. And worst comes to worst, you might get some house arrest, maybe a few months in prison, maybe. And so that's why, and the marijuana business was so lucrative and nobody knew that growing up. Everybody, watched Scarface and everything. It was Scarface. It was cocaine. It's like, that's the quick, fast money. Everybody's doing it. It's at night. But you get caught with a half ounce back then, you're doing a 3-year mandatory.
You're absolutely fine.
An ounce, you're getting caught, you're getting 5-year mandatory.
Right.
So it's like, for 1 ounce of coke, how much you going to make? And you're dealing with 5 years. Whereas the marijuana, you could be making so much money, way more than the coke,
right.
Right. And with less risk, no risk. If you keep it like,
100%.
Low key and without being involved in like organized crime where there's groups where they can hit you with a RICO charge and include the marijuana with it, things
100%.
like that.
The marijuana that you sold, like hydroponic, yours was like a level above. You're right. Did I read that right?
So I sold so it goes from the very dirty dirt weed that was like, brown, seedy, grass, and right. And at times I could buy that for $200 a pound, $150 a pound in New York, because they get rid of all the garbage. So you go from $200 a pound all the way up to $8,000 a pound. And that's what, those hydroponic you're talking about. Yeah. And like, we had like little, we used to grow, like get these little things with nuggets.
Yeah.
They were like little nugget like this. And those I think were the highest ones. They were like 8,000. You could get back. And then if you retailed it, like I was just going by my prices, but you could get like, 600, easily 600 an ounce. And, you're talking like that brings you back almost 11,000 if you're retailing it, So
it's a no-brainer. Comes with a lesser charge, makes a shit ton of money.
Right. And you get, and it's residual customers, like they know you got the good weed and you're like, so like, like you might be a high-end customer. I didn't deal ounces. I dealt with, if you wanted an ounce, I gave you a pound. And if you wanted a pound, I gave you 5 pounds. And if you wanted 5 pounds, I gave you 20 pounds.
Yeah.
Because that's how I did it. I don't want to deal with, the small level stuff, but there's enough money and I gave it to them for enough money so the retailers could make a lot of money on it as well.
Right.
I was just,
everybody.
Yeah. But it's a great business. Like, why wouldn't you want to break it down? You could sell them ounces and have your customers and make, like I'll sell a pound and make 200 and you might sell an ounce and make almost 200 just off an ounce. Yeah.
So you got out of jail. You started selling. I'm fully like, I am really into this right now. You started selling. How do we get from selling weed and doing stuff like that to then going towards working for the mafia?
So it all coexisted my whole life because you couldn't be Italian and be a criminal without the mafia being involved with you some way. Even Irish, like in Western Mass, much more Western Mass than Connecticut, but even back then, Connecticut as well. Going back to the 80s, we just lasted a little bit longer than Connecticut because the patriarchs got arrested in like the late 80s, so they took like 20 of them off the streets in the Connecticut area.
That wraps up this episode of our mini series with Anthony Arillotta. The next episode will be publishing tomorrow, so make sure you're following the podcast so you don't miss it. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next one.